Hello, welcome back to Must Read More. I'm John, and this is the fourth shelf of my bookshelf tour. And so the last two shelves have been mostly nonfiction, and for at least 5 or 6 shelves here, we'll be going into fiction. So from here on, I'm probably going to split the shelves into parts. So I'll probably do half of a shelf and then another half of a shelf in 2 different videos, just because there are so many books on the shelves, and I have a tendency to ramble sometimes, and I know that it can be hard to watch a 30 or so minute video about a guy rambling about his bookshelves, particularly when I don't remember all these books as well as I would like to. And one of the nice things about doing this bookshelf tour is that because I have to take all these books off the shelf and look at them and talk about them, I'm going back and realizing, well, I don't remember these very well. Some of these I haven't read in 10, 15 years, maybe even 20 years. So it's been quite a long time since I've read some of these, and my memory is just revealing itself to be pretty poor. And I wish that wasn't the case, because I know it would be far more interesting for me to stand here and talk about the authors and all the stories and the collections and everything, but I'm just not able to do that, and I hope you'll bear with me. So we'll just get right into it. The first book is Robert Penn Warren's All the King's Men. I bought this new about 16 years ago when I was 15 years old. I bought it at Joseph Beth in Lexington, and I read this book when I was 16 and going through a pretty rough period of my life, pretty rough patch. And I don't know what compelled me to pick it up at that point, because I really was barely functional. But I was just captivated by Penn Warren's writing, just completely captivated by he has this beautiful poetic style, and even though I've said numerous times that poetry and I really don't get along, or it just bounces off of me, it seems to me that if it's prose poetry, if it's long form poetry, then I can kind of take it in much better. And this book is really kind of a poetic in that style. And now, Penn Warren was a white Southern man, and there are problematic elements to this book, so we need to keep that in mind. As always, when it comes to problematic authors, I will refer you to Michael K. Vaughan's video on problematic authors, which I think is just a brilliant video, and really, as far as I'm concerned, one of the best videos on YouTube. Certainly one of the best videos on BookTube. I really like the way that Michael K. Vaughan talks about problematic authors, and he can do it so much better than I can. So I'll leave a link to that video in the description, okay? Now, the next book I read when I was in 3rd grade. I read it when I was really much too young to be reading it, and it messed me up. It's John Gardner's Grendel, which is a retelling of Beowulf from Grendel's perspective. Grendel the monster there. He is kind of just an existential being. He's come into the world, and he doesn't know why he's there, and he can't get any answers. He can't talk to the people, because whenever they see him, they run away screaming because they're afraid of him. So he starts to attack them because he's really irritated by them. And he goes on to meet the dragon, and the dragon kind of has a great deal of contempt for Grendel, and thinks he's stupid, and Grendel's really annoyed by the dragon, but he keeps going back to talk to him. And of course, this has a sad ending, or it has a sad ending if you look at it from Grendel's perspective, as this being who's cast into the world without a purpose or without a reason, and then nothing really goes right for him, and he's confused all the time. And then, of course, Beowulf comes and pulls his arm off. And I've just read this a couple of times over the years, and I need to read it again sometime because it is really a foundational book for me. It really formed the way that I think, which is, like I said, I read it in third grade, which was in 2001, 2002, and I was just far too young for existentialist concepts, and it like I said, it was a foundational book for me, so it pretty well messed me up for the rest of my life, I guess. But I love it. I love this book. Now the next is Beowulf, the Burton Raffel translation. I talked about this in one of my earlier wrap-ups. I believe it was in my August wrap-up. I really liked this translation. I had never read Beowulf before, and I think this was the perfect translation for me. Raffel really seemed to bring the characters to life, and there was an immediacy to this translation that I liked. But I had never read it before, and so I haven't read any other translations, and I'd really like to read some more translations one of these days. And you can see there is Beowulf and the Dragon, I believe. Yep. The next book, well, here's a fishing lure from Louisiana somewhere. Put that down there. The next book is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. I read this, I believe, last year, and I was kind of influenced to do it because I had been watching a lot of Steve Donoghue's videos, and he was always talking, he still does, of course, he's always talking about Moby Dick being one of the great works of the Western canon, I believe. And I had never read Moby Dick, and I felt it was a gap in my knowledge, and I don't like to have gaps in my knowledge. I try to fill them in as much as I can. And I have to be honest and say that I had mixed feelings about this book, because on one hand I found it very, very good and very captivating, and Ishmael and Queequeg and Captain Ahab and this Starbuck, of course, and the pursuit of the white whale, the Holy Grail, and on the other hand, it is about whaling and harpooning whales and tiring them out and killing them, and in Melville's words, peeling them like oranges. And that was just really hard. That was a really hard read. Whaling is anything like that is going to be a hard read for me. But I was glad that I read it, and some of the scenes really stick out to me, and I like the way this book ends. I really like the way this book ends, and I'm glad that I read this. The next is The Divine Comedy, Part 1, Hell, the Inferno, by Dante Alighieri, and this is the Dorothy L. Sayers translation. I've read 2 translations of this, and I've actually read the Inferno 3 times, even though I don't really like it very much. But I find the imagery very interesting. I find the concept very interesting. But I just don't like Dante. I've read a biography of Dante, and it seems to me like Dante was just kind of a hypocrite, and it really annoys me that Dante imagines himself going through hell and then purgatory and onwards to heaven, and the whole time he's talking about another man's wife, and meanwhile he's married. And I know marriages were a lot different in Renaissance Italy, and it just kind of bothered me. Dante's putting all these people he doesn't like in hell, but then he's giving himself this get out of jail free card, and I just didn't like that. I mean, I know it's supposed to be, what is it, an allegory where he talks about, the warring factions in, where was he from? Was he from Florence? I tend to get those city-states mixed up. And I don't know, I haven't read the Purgatorio and Paradiso. I have Paradiso, but I've never actually seen a copy of Purgatory, and I keep my eyes peeled for it. I've just never seen it. So I would like to finish the whole thing one day, eventually, someday, but we'll see about that. Now, the next one I read earlier this summer before I had a booktube channel, and I really enjoyed the first part, and I didn't really like the second part, and that is The Barber of Seville and The Marriage of Figaro by Beaumarchais. This is two different plays. So, in The Barber of Seville, there's this wealthy young man, and he is wandering about, and he sees this beautiful woman up on the balcony of this house, and along with his barber, Figaro, who is kind of a ne'er-do-well, they formulate this plan to the young woman is going to be basically forced into a marriage with her old uncle, who keeps her kind of almost prisoner in this house, and he doesn't want her to get married to anybody else. I think because she's rich. I think she's going to inherit a bunch of money. So Figaro and the wealthy young man there, they formulate this plan to get him married to the young lady, and I just found that it was a lot of fun. It was very a very kind of, I have no idea how this would play in today's world. I just thought it was kind of it's very comedic. It's a funny play, but I didn't really like The Marriage of Figaro, and it takes place a couple of years later. The two young people have gotten married, and now Figaro wants to get married, and meanwhile the wealthy man is having an affair on the woman he tried so hard to marry in The Barber of Seville, and everyone is just kind of, it seemed like there was way too much going on in that one for me, but I really like The Barber of Seville. The next one is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which, it was okay. I liked this translation, but I couldn't help but feel that it went right over my head. It's part of the Arthur legend, and I really don't know very much about the Arthur legend. I'd like to know more, but it seems like every time I try, I just kind of lose interest really fast. And I remember Joseph Campbell talked about this in The Power of Myth, and it was really interesting to me there, which, to be fair, I find the interviews with Joseph Campbell to be really interesting, but I find his books to be kind of hard to understand and a little bit boring. But we'll get to those later. I've read a few of those, and they're over here and over there. So, but I enjoyed reading this. However, I just don't think that I understood it very well. The next is another book that I was kind of influenced to read by Steve Donoghue. And, well, I've heard about it all my life, and I just finally felt that I needed to fill this gap with these next two books. And this is the Illiad of Homer, or the Illiad by Homer, I guess. Of course, this is about the war in Troy, and the siege of Troy, and the fight to bring back Helen. And I had mixed feelings reading this. I really, really like this translation. This is the E.V. Rieu translation, revised and updated by Peter Jones with D.C.H. Rieu. I really, really liked this translation. I just found it very hard to deal with Achilles and Agamemnon, and I think the power of a good translation is that it can make you either love or hate the characters, and I certainly felt that in this book, because there were characters I really liked and I really empathized with, and then there was Agamemnon, whom I absolutely 100% detested and could not stand, and wished that Achilles would chop him into bits, and whose death in the Oresteia I did not mourn whatsoever. And Achilles is very pouty and angst-ridden, I guess. And this could all be the translation. I don't know. This is the only translation I've read. This is a very violent translation. This is a very bloody translation. There are a lot of cut out livers and brains splattered in helmets, and the it's a very violent translation. But I see it in all these other books that I read now. I feel it. I sense its foundational presence in so many other books now, and I'm really glad that I read this. The next book is The Odyssey by Homer, translated by E.V. Rieu, revised translation by D.C.H. Rieu, and with a new introduction by Peter Jones. I read this after I read the Illiad, which it took me about a month and a half to get through the Illiad. I would get frustrated with it and put it down and go, I'm not going to finish that. And then a couple days later, I'd pick it up and read some more until I got to the end. And I had a much easier time reading this because it's a better standalone narrative. And as I was reading it, I realized that I had some misconceptions about Odysseus, about the Odyssey. And I was really glad to read this and clear them up. I still got frustrated with the characters, but I'm glad I read it. The next book is the Robert Fagles translation of the Oresteia, and I talked about this in, I believe, also in my August wrap-up. I didn't particularly care for this one either. Agamemnon features in this one as well, and he's killed by his wife. I felt really bad for his wife because Agamemnon had killed their daughter, had sacrificed their daughter to the gods to go off on this, 11-year war in Troy. And I felt really bad for Cassandra, who is killed for no reason. And this is another book I really didn't enjoy all that much. I'm glad that I read it, but I didn't even enjoy it as much as as when I was reading the Illiad. It's just, I kind of felt, after I had read the Illiad and the Odyssey, I kind of felt that I needed to read some Aeschylus and to read the Oresteia. And I'm glad I did. I mean, it fills in that gap in my knowledge, and I'm glad for that. It's just I really didn't enjoy it. This is a play, by the way. I just didn't enjoy it. So, but I don't know why I've kept it up. I think it's just kind of nice to have this set. The next book is The Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa. And I really liked this book. It's hard to explain this book to someone who's never read it. I believe that Pessoa lived in Portugal about 100 years ago, right? And I think that this book was found after his death. I don't know if he actually published anything while he was alive. He wrote under numerous pseudonyms. In fact, he took on different characters to write different books. And this is a book about a very isolated man who lives an isolated life. And he's just kind of an observer of life. He doesn't really involve himself in friendships or relationships, or he has a job, but he doesn't really involve himself in that, and he just kind of exists and observes, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's beautifully written, and I read it the first year I ever spent by myself, and I read it every night before I would go to bed, and I really did enjoy it, though. I find that I don't really remember it all that well. I remember images better than I remember the prose. And I would really like to reread this again at some point. The next book, well, I'll do two books. The next two are Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and Smiley's People by John le Carré. This is actually a trilogy, but I don't have the Honorable Schoolboy, which is the middle volume. I've read these before. Well, I've read all these books on this shelf. I don't know why I said that. But, I read these about, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years ago, maybe more than that. And I got these in a book haul about a month ago. And I've been meaning to reread this series because I absolutely know that most of it went over my head. And I recently watched the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy from the 70s with Alec Guinness, and just kind of, it's made me want to read these books again. Well, Tinker Tailor is about a mole. There is a mole in what do they call it? The circus. And Smiley has been discharged, and he comes and tries to figure out who this Soviet agent is. And I don't really remember the Honorable Schoolboy or Smiley's people all that well. That's one reason I got them, is because I don't remember those books particularly well. And the next book is John le Carré's The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. I recently learned that this is a Richard Burton movie, and I'd like to see that sometime. This book is about a disgraced agent who is tasked with going over the Berlin Wall. Basically, he's sent to, I can't remember exactly what his mission is, but he falls in with this girl who has communist sympathies in London, and she also gets invited by the communists there to come over and see Berlin, and he kind of attaches himself to her. And I really don't remember this. I read this about 15 or 16 years ago, and I just don't remember it very well, but I have never forgotten the ending of this book. This is a George Smiley novel also. He features in this, and I remember I stayed up late one night to read this, and the ending just shocked me. I was just shocked. And I need to reread this sometimes, but I'm afraid of reading that ending again, to be honest. The next one is probably the last book we're going to do on this little part, and that is The Mezzanine by Nicholson Baker. This is an interesting book about a guy who is going up an escalator to a mezzanine, and he's just having all these thoughts about himself and the world around him. It's just completely his thoughts. And I didn't like this book the first time I read it. I've only read it once, but I didn't like it at first, but I think about it quite often, and there are passages of this that just, they're very, they'll be about, tying your shoes or putting the cap on a bottle or something like that. And it's just, it really kind of does capture just what your thoughts are as you wander through your day, and it was just kind of interesting that way. I'd also really like to reread this one sometime. It's a very short book. It doesn't take a lot of effort. And there is Nicholson Baker, and it's just a pretty neat little book. I don't really ever hear anybody talk about it, but it's worth reading. So I think we're going to call that a video, and in my next video I'll go ahead and finish the shelf. I'm going to go ahead and make it right now, but because we are going on quite a ways here, I think that I'll just say thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed my little tour here. I hope you'll come back for the next video, and I'll see you next time.